Unchain me, human, and I'll teach you desire beyond your imagination. Ben adjusted the heavy magnetic clamps on his belt as he stepped into the pressurized atmosphere of the high spire vault. The silence here was thick, vibrating with the low-frequency hum of 1,000 graviton dampeners designed to keep a god in its place. He was the only one allowed inside without a full-body lead ceramic suit, because human physiology possessed a chaotic, grounded quality that the delicate psionic lattices of the Empire could not easily disrupt. At the center of the room, suspended in a web of glowing filaments, sat Vaylin. Her skin possessed a soft, iridescent sheen that shifted from deep indigo to a pale, haunting violet as she breathed. Her hair, like liquid shadow, flowed upward in the zero-gravity field of her cage, framing a face defined by sharp, elegant angles and eyes that burned with the cold fire of a distant nebula. She watched him with a predatory stillness that would have sent any other technician into a state of neural collapse, but Ben only felt a low, steady thrum of curiosity. He walked right up to the edge of the shimmering barrier, the heat from her body radiating through the air like a physical weight. "You are late," she said, her voice vibrating through his very bones rather than traveling through the air. Ben cracked a small, weary smile and tapped the display on his wrist. "The airlocks on this station were designed by people who clearly hate convenience," he replied, his voice echoing in the vast, sterile chamber. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from the energy field that bound her. He could see the way her pupils dilated at the gesture, a flicker of something far more complex than simple hatred dancing in those starlit depths. He began to work on the primary anchor, his fingers moving with a deliberate rhythm that came from years of coaxing stubborn machines into submission. Vaylin leaned forward as much as the glowing filaments would allow, the movement causing the light to dance across the curves of her collarbone and the soft swell of her chest. The dampener field was supposed to be a total barrier, a wall that no mind could penetrate, yet she seemed to be reaching through it with nothing more than the intensity of her gaze. Ben felt the familiar itch of the field trying to scramble his synapses, but he pushed through it, focusing on the mechanical resistance of the dials. "The others do not touch the casing," she whispered, the sound a silken caress against his mind. "They use the remote interfaces because they fear the resonance," she continued, shifting her weight so that the silk-like fabric of her gown clung to her thighs. Ben didn't look up, though his heart rate spiked in a way that had nothing to do with the gravitons. "I prefer to feel what I am fixing," he said, wiping a smudge of grease from the gold-plated sensor. "Human hands have a way of finding the truth that a computer misses," he added, finally meeting her eyes. The proximity was intoxicating, a heady mix of sterile air and something that reminded him of crushed wildflowers after a summer rain. He realized then that she wasn't just a prisoner. She was a masterpiece of biological engineering, and the machine he was servicing was slowly draining the vitality from her veins. Every spark that fueled the galactic jump gates came from the slow, agonizing extraction of her essence. He saw the faint, bruised shadows beneath her eyes and felt a sudden, sharp pang of human indignation. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. Vaylin let out a breath that sounded like a sigh of escaping steam. "It is a hollow ache that never ends," she replied, her gaze dropping to his hands. "Your species is strange, Ben," she said, using his name for the first time. "You possess a density of spirit that makes you anchors in this sea of light," she noted, tilting her head to the side. He moved to the secondary pylon, his body brushing against the outer shimmer of her cage. A jolt of static electricity leaped between them, a sharp snap that made his skin tingle with a sudden, localized heat. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in closer, his shoulder nearly touching the energy barrier. He could see the fine texture of her skin now, the way it seemed to pulse with a rhythmic, bioluminescent glow that followed the beat of her dual hearts. "We are built for friction," Ben said, his breath hitching as she moved her hand toward his, separated only by a translucent wall of light. "Humanity thrives when things are difficult," he stated, his fingers tracing the line of the interface port. "We don't just survive the pressure, we use it to harden ourselves," he added, feeling the warmth of her palm through the field. The desire that flared in her eyes was sudden and sharp, a hungry thing that had been starved for centuries. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for a catalyst. She needed the raw, unrefined energy of a human soul to disrupt the perfect, sterile trap the concordance had built around her. Ben felt the pull of it, a gravitational tug on his very heartstrings that promised a pleasure as intense as the pain she endured. The revelation hit him as he accessed the core subdirectory of the dampener. It wasn't just a battery. The entire station was a parasite. Vaylin wasn't a criminal or a threat. She was the last of her kind, a species whose natural emotional output could stabilize subspace. The High Council had captured her to ensure their monopoly on travel, turning her loneliness and despair into a commodity. The twist, however, was hidden in the encryption. If she ever felt a moment of genuine, reciprocated passion, the feedback loop would shatter the entire FTL network. The Empire kept her in a state of perpetual, numbing sorrow because her joy was a weapon of mass disruption. "They told me you were a monster," Ben whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the data. Vaylin leaned her forehead against the barrier, her eyes closing as a single, glowing tear tracked down her cheek. "I am whatever they need me to be to keep the lights burning," she said, her voice thick with a sudden, raw vulnerability. "But you see me, don't you?" she asked, opening her eyes to find his. "I see a woman who is being murdered 1 second at a time," he replied, his jaw tightening. He looked toward the security cameras, knowing that the guards would be watching. He had to make a choice. He could continue his maintenance and keep the galaxy running, or he could give her the one thing the Concordance feared most. "Unchain me, human," she pleaded, her voice a desperate, melodic command. "And I will teach you desire beyond your imagination," she promised, her body pressing against the barrier with a sudden, suggestive force that made the light flicker and groan under the weight of her intent. Ben didn't hesitate. He bypassed the safety protocols with a brutal efficiency that only a human who understood the flaws in alien logic could manage. He didn't use a code. He used a physical shunt, jamming his specialized multi-tool into the heart of the processor and twisting it with a grunt of exertion. The alarm sirens began to wail, a deep, resonant booming that shook the floor, but the energy filaments holding Vaylin began to dim. The shimmering wall between them flickered, and then dissolved with a sound like shattering glass. As the field dropped, the full weight of her psionic presence hit him, a wave of heat and longing that nearly brought him to his knees. Vaylin tumbled forward, her gravity-free suspension ending abruptly. Ben caught her, his arms wrapping around her slender, powerful frame. Her skin felt like warm silk against his palms, and the scent of her, something like dark honey and wood smoke, filled his senses. She let out a sharp, gasping breath as she felt the solid weight of him, her fingers digging into his shoulders with a strength that spoke of centuries of isolation. "You actually did it," she whispered, her face inches from his. "I'm human," he said, his voice rough with a sudden, overwhelming surge of protectiveness. "We have a habit of breaking things that are meant to be impossible," he added, pulling her closer. The physical contact was like a lightning strike. Every point where their skin met seemed to ignite, a localized explosion of sensory data that made the rest of the world fade into a blur of red light and screaming sirens. She was vibrant, a living fire in his arms, and the look of pure hunger in her eyes was more terrifying than any army the Concordance could send. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the vault began to groan as a security team applied a thermal breach. Ben knew they had less than a minute before the room was swarmed with armored enforcers. He pulled Vaylin toward the maintenance shaft he had surreptitiously unlocked earlier, his movements frantic but precise. "We have to move," he shouted over the roar of the alarms. Vaylin stood her ground, her feet bare on the cold metal floor, her violet skin glowing with an intensity that began to illuminate the entire room. "Let them come," she said, a cold, beautiful smile spreading across her lips. "For the first time in an eon, I can feel the stars again," she declared, raising her arms as the air around her began to ripple with distorted light. The doors burst open in a shower of sparks and molten metal. An officer stepped through, his plasma rifle leveled at Ben's chest. "Step away from the asset, human," the officer commanded, his voice distorted by his helmet's speakers. "She isn't an asset," Ben shouted back, stepping in front of Vaylin to shield her. "She's a person, and you're a pack of scavengers," he spat, his hand going to the kinetic pulse detonator on his belt. Vaylin placed a hand on his shoulder, and the heat of it was almost unbearable. "He is mine," she told the guards, the words carrying a physical force that knocked the enforcers back several paces. And you are nothing, she added, releasing a burst of psionic energy that short-circuited every electronic device in the room. The lights died, plunging them into a darkness lit only by the fierce, violet glow of her body and the dim, red emergency strobes. In the sudden, heavy shadows of the vault, the world narrowed down to the space between them. The guards were incapacitated, their armor fused by the pulse, leaving a temporary pocket of silence. Ben felt the adrenaline pumping through his veins, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Vaylin turned him to face her, her eyes searching his with a fierce, burning curiosity. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the touch so light it was almost a dream, yet it left a trail of fire in its wake. "Your heart," she whispered, placing her palm over his chest. "It beats with such a primitive, beautiful urgency," she observed, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "It's just the way we're wired," Ben replied, his hands finding the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. The sheer physical presence of her was overwhelming. He could feel the curves of her body through his flight suit, the lithe muscles of her legs, and the soft heat of her stomach. "Teach me," she breathed, her lips brushing against his. "Teach me the desire that has defied the laws of the universe for a single person," she urged, her voice a low, melodic thrum. Ben didn't need further prompting. He claimed her lips in a kiss that was raw, desperate, and filled with the pent-up energy of a man who had spent his life fixing machines while yearning for something real. It wasn't the delicate, refined affection of the alien quartz. It was a human collision of teeth and tongue and skin. She let out a soft, surprised moan into his mouth, her body arching into his as if she were trying to merge her very soul with his. The feedback loop he had read about began to manifest, a warm, golden glow radiating from where they touched. The sensation was unlike anything Ben had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical pleasure, it was a total synchronization of their being. He could feel her memories, the cold vacuum of space, the ache of the filaments, and she could feel his, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the grit of a workshop, the stubborn refusal to give up. This was the human secret. Empathy was a physical force. His brain waves, messy and unrefined, acted as a stabilizer for her immense power, grounding her and allowing her to focus without the agony of the dampeners. Together, they were creating a resonance that the Concordance could never have predicted. "You are so strong," she gasped, breaking the kiss to bury her face in the crook of his neck. "I can feel your willpower," she continued, her breath hot against his skin. "It's like a forge," she added, her teeth grazing his collarbone. Ben groaned, his hands wandering lower to grip the firm curves of her hips. "We don't have much time," he managed to say, his voice thick with a desire that was rapidly becoming all-consuming. "The station is going to stabilize or explode, and I'd prefer the former," he noted, even as he pressed her back against the cool surface of the fallen primary anchor. Vaylin looked up at him, her eyes no longer dying stars but bright, living suns. "Let it break," she said, her hands moving to the fasteners of his suit. "Let the whole galaxy see what happens when a human chooses love over order," she challenged, pulling his shirt open to reveal the sweating, heaving expanse of his chest. The intensity of the moment was a sheer, physical weight, a pressure that would redefine his understanding of what it meant to be alive. As their union deepened, the station itself seemed to respond. The groaning of the metal frames turned into a harmonic hum, and the flickering lights stabilized into a steady, warm amber. The battery was no longer being drained, she was being filled. Ben pushed himself to the limit of his endurance, his body a vessel for an energy that should have incinerated him. But he was human, and humans were built to carry burdens that would break any other race. He welcomed the heat, the sweat, and the overwhelming surge of emotion that poured from Vaylin into him. "I can see it," she cried out, her head falling back as a wave of golden light erupted from her skin. "I can see the paths between the worlds," she shouted, her fingers digging furrows into his shoulders. "Hold on to me," Ben commanded, his voice a guttural roar as he drove them both toward the edge of a sensory precipice. "Don't let go, Vaylin," he added, his vision blurring as the world around them began to dissolve into pure white light. The unchaining was complete. The dampeners were gone, not because they were broken, but because they were irrelevant. The resonance between them had created a new frequency, one that didn't need a cage to be contained. In that final, explosive moment of release, The FTL network across the entire galaxy surged with a new, vibrant life. Ships that had been stranded for years suddenly found their way home, and the sterile halls of the High Council were flooded with a warmth they couldn't explain. Humanity had not just saved a woman, they had gifted the universe a heart. Ben felt his consciousness waver, the intensity of the experience finally pushing him toward exhaustion, but he felt Vaylin's arms hold him tight. When Ben finally opened his eyes, the vault was silent and bathed in the soft, natural light of the star system outside. The heavy blast doors were still ruined, and the air had been replaced by a clean, crisp freshness that felt like the first breath of spring. Vaylin was sitting beside him on the floor, her gown tattered but her expression one of serene, absolute power. She looked at him with a tenderness that made his throat tighten. "You are awake," she said, her voice now a clear, melodic chime that no longer required psionic projection. "Did we win?" Ben asked, trying to sit up and finding that his body felt strangely light and energized. Vaylin smiled and leaned over to kiss his forehead. "The Concordance is in retreat," she told him, her eyes dancing with a playful light. "The network is free, and I am no longer their prisoner," she added, helping him to his feet. He looked around the room, seeing the remnants of the technology that had once held her. It looked small and insignificant now, a collection of scrap metal and outdated ideas. "What happens now?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "Now," she began, leading him toward the observation deck where the stars were visible in a way he had never seen before. "We show them what else humanity is capable of," she said, her thumb tracing the back of his hand. "You unchain me, Ben," she whispered, pulling him close for one more lingering kiss. "And as I promised, I will spend an eternity teaching you a desire that the rest of the galaxy is only just beginning to imagine," she vowed, her eyes reflecting the infinite possibilities of a future they would build together. Ben smiled, knowing that while he had been the one to break the physical chains, it was her love that had truly set him free.